First of all, in terms of happiness, like how does it make you feel inside? It makes you, those warm feelings are from, your heart rate slows down. You get a burst of oxytocin. There are these neurochemicals that make you feel happy. And that's why he says, the Dalai Lama, I won't argue with him, if you're compassionate, you're going to feel better. But also, of course, it helps other people. And that's what we're all about at the Greater Good. I mean, that's why we have the name, Greater Good. It's not just about yourself. It's about trying to create a more compassionate world.
Thanks so much for being here. Hello and welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. My name is Ki Sung. I'm the managing editor of digital news at KQED, and I also co-host the Mindshift podcast. A few reminders before we get started. Tonight's program is being recorded, so we kindly ask that you silence your cell phone for the duration of our program. Also, if you have any questions for our guest speakers, please use the cards that are on your seats or throughout the chat if you're on YouTube. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest speakers from UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. If we're seeking more happiness in our lives, it can be challenging to figure out where to start or what habits to change. Shuka Kalantari, Kiara Newman, and Jill Suttie wrote a book to help with that. They are the authors of The Science of Happiness Workbook, 10 Practices for a Meaningful Life, a practical, research-based guide to cultivate greater well-being and stronger relationships for everyone. Shuka Kalantari is the executive producer of the award-winning podcast, The Science of Happiness. I was just listening to an episode this morning and was having a moment while I was stuck on the Bay Bridge. It's a really great listen, I highly recommend. Kiara Newman is the managing editor of Greater Good magazine. I share her articles all the time because they're so helpful to the educator community and the world, to be honest. Jill Suttie is a staff writer and contributing editor of Greater Good magazine. I share her articles as well, so please check them out. Shuka, Kiara, and Jill, welcome and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
All right, now, folks here with us at the Commonwealth Club, you're going to hear insights from these authors, and there is a short exercise. So be ready to participate, and I hope you've been nice to your neighbor, the one sitting near you. All right, so Shuka, Kiara, and Jill, let me start off by asking you about global happiness. We're going to talk about the World Happiness Report. We've all heard about surveys from the Gallup poll. I think it's one thing you're exposed to in civics class in school. And the Gallup poll especially comes up around the time of presidential elections. But the Gallup organization also surveys people around the world on several topics, including happiness. They even break down happiness by age group. So this is a world ranking. Folks here at the Commonwealth Club, can you guess where the United States ranks in world happiness? Where do you think we are? 36, low. Any other numbers or guesses? 20s, 17? In the middle. You all are pretty good. We are, we're not in the top 10. We're not even in the top 20. This year's ranking, we are number 24. And that's a drop compared to years past. And you may have heard that young people, ages 15 to 24, are especially unhappy. But they're not alone. We're all less happy than we've been compared to years past. So your book, The Science of Happiness Workbook, seems to be coming at a perfect time. So Jill, let's start with us in the United States. Why are Americans increasingly unhappy? And let's start also by defining what it means to be happy in order to help us understand our unhappiness.
Okay, well, the way that we look at the science of happiness at the Greater Good is maybe different than a lot of people think about happiness, which is just feeling good. I mean, when you're happy. If you do something fun, you feel happy. If you go out with your friends for dinner, you feel happy, and that is happiness. It's a feeling that you have, but the way that we think about it is a little bit more complex than that, because researchers, when they study happiness, and even in the World Happiness Report, they ask about life satisfaction. as a key to happiness. How satisfied are you with your life, which is kind of giving you a more global view of happiness. And yeah, it might include, like, how often do you feel positive instead of negative emotions? But it also is about other things, like, you know, what's the state of your relationships? Do you feel authentic? Do you feel like the world is supportive of you? Do you feel like, you know, you have purpose and meaning in your life? So these other things contribute to your overall life satisfaction. Are your psychological needs being met? To get technical. So that's how we look at happiness, is more in that sense. Like, how can you have lasting happiness that isn't just fleeting, because all emotions are generally pretty fleeting and they can change depending on the circumstances, but how can you be more generally happy with your life? And then in terms of why we're at this stage right now, well, I mean, there could be a lot of reasons, but if you look at the World Happiness Report, one of the big reasons is the loss of social trust. And what that means is that you don't feel like your community, the citizens in your state or country are there to care about you. Like, they don't care about you, they're not going to support you if you're in need, and they're not trustworthy, basically. They're not reliable. So if you think about that, I mean, what's happening right now is there's a lot of feeling, there's a lot of division, divisiveness in the country, and people are looking, you know, we're in an us versus them kind of view of the world, and so it's harder to have social trust if you're thinking a lot of people are them and they're not trustworthy. And I think people are losing faith in their institutions. So, you know, if we can't trust, you know, our healthcare system or our legal system, or, you know, even our workplaces, they're not necessarily safe. Maybe we have no kind of guarantee for work. You know, that's going to increase our sense of social distrust. And there's a definite tie between that and happiness, clearly.
As we navigate our worlds, an important skill to have is understanding what's in your control and what's not in your control. What are some examples of what's in your control and what's not in your control when things feel out of control? And how does that affect one's well-being?
I think that's a big topic, control, and there's probably a lot of ways that we could talk about it, so maybe I'll start with a couple. I think if we all sit down and think about it, we probably can recognize what's in our control, what's sort of partly in our control, what's totally out of our control. The problem is, I think we find our brains like wanting to or trying to control things that aren't in our control. Like, you know, how other people act, how they feel about us, whether we're going to stay healthy in the future, you know, how our kids' lives turn out. And, you know, the uncertainty of not having control is just so uncomfortable, or can be so uncomfortable, and so maybe anxiety provoking, that we kind of run around trying to control everything. And maybe, you know, one of the things that falls under that category and that's relevant to this discussion, I think, is trying to control our own happiness, our own feelings at any given moment. I think, you know, the self-help and self-improvement space gives a lot of messages that we can do that. You know, your mind creates your reality, and happiness is just a choice. So we can find ourselves really feeling like we've done something wrong if we're not feeling how we want to feel. We've made some sort of mistake and we just need to do better. But so it's a practice of like constantly reminding ourselves that our own habits, our own behaviors are just a small piece of, you know, how we're going to feel at any given moment. There's a lot that's out of our control that influences that. So it doesn't mean we've done something wrong, you know, especially given everything that's going on in the world.
So you list several keys to well-being in your book. I want to go, there are 10, and I want to go deeper into a few of them here. At the top of your list is connection. And your book starts with the story of someone who, by all measures, is a nationally recognized successful person. He went to medical school. And I think this story is especially relevant in the Bay Area. Shuka, tell us about the person who illustrates why we need more connection in our lives.
Well, first of all, thank you for bringing that up as one of the pathways to happiness, because I think our connection to others, as research shows, is the kind of foundation of our well-being, is our social connections, is our communities. And so the people that we all probably here know about is our former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. And a few years back, he wrote a book about the antithesis to connection, which is loneliness. And he very acutely said that loneliness is an epidemic here in the United States. In the last APA survey, 1 in 3 Americans report feeling lonely at least weekly. That's not our fault. Society plays into that. The division that's all around us plays into that. Social media plays into that, especially if you look at the statistics on, people under the age of 30 and what they're experiencing. Sorry, I'm getting goosebumps. So even though Vivek Murthy wrote the book on loneliness, when we asked him to be a guest on our podcast, The Science of Happiness, he actually shared with us that even though he wrote the book on it, he still experiences loneliness. As a child, he was the kid that was nervous going to school because he was sitting alone. He would be sitting alone in the cafeteria at lunch. In medical school, he just saw, our broken system and how lonely and isolated the patients were. During COVID, I mean, gosh, we all remember that. Not a lot of connections. So he tried to practice in social connection. It's called capitalizing on positive events. That's a nice little phrase to say, reach out to a friend, a colleague, a loved one, and ask them, what's something good that happened in your day? And then listen and talk to them about it and take it in, because we all call each other when things are going bad. But what if you just call someone and say, hey, what's going well? And so he tried this practice, which we'll later get into, in which research has shown that, in romantic relationships, it makes us feel more connected. In multiple studies across cultures, just getting positive affirmation from sharing something that good happens to you makes you happier. It makes you less depressed. It decreases negative emotions. And so he tried it, and he called a friend on Zoom. It was around COVID time. The friend was in London, so he wasn't going to see him in person either way. And after he did it, he reported feeling better, but I want to read to you something that he said that I think we end the podcast episode in, so spoiler alert. But he said, and I think this ultimately speaks to the concept of connection. He said there's 3 words that really bring it together. Put people first. I hope that if we put people first in every dimension of our life, that we will have more robust, more connected, and ultimately more fulfilled experiences in life.
Okay, so Jill, my next question is for you. I want to ask you about a more complex emotion that I don't think we hear much about, which is compassion. If you grew up in the 80s, Blockbuster Video did not print on their VHS tapes, "Be compassionate, please rewind." Thank you for the two of you. But you wrote in your book that the Dalai Lama said, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Can you define compassion and how it shows up in the world?
Yeah, compassion is basically kind of a warm feeling that you have when you care about other people, another person, and you have a desire to protect them or relieve their suffering. And it's pretty instinctual. I mean, it starts, with parents taking care of their children. They're very tuned in to what's happening with their children, and they learn that it's very rewarding to feel compassion for another person and you feel motivated to make sure that they're not suffering. And I mean, the way it shows up in we're kind of biologically designed for it, or maybe you could say evolutionarily designed for it, because, we need to have strong social networks, as we've been talking about, to be happy. And compassion is a great way to make sure that your community is solid. I mean, compassion, first of all, in terms of happiness, like how does it make you feel inside? It makes you, those warm feelings are from, your heart rate slows down. You get a burst of oxytocin. There are these neurochemicals that make you feel happy. And that's why he says, the Dalai Lama, I won't argue with him, if you're compassionate, you're going to feel better. But also, of course, it helps other people. And that's what we're all about at the Greater Good. I mean, that's why we have the name, Greater Good. It's not just about yourself. It's about trying to create a more compassionate world. And, if you look at the research on compassion, you find that, compassionate people make good friends. You're taking care of each other, then you're going to have stronger friendships. They make great romantic partners. They make great leaders also. So, compassion is sort of a social glue that keeps us all feeling like we're in a safe and supported environment, and that no one's going to fall through the cracks. So,
And just to kind of briefly add to that, and you said this kind of on the list of what compassion is. Compassion is kind of the springboard for action. So, when we truly care for others, we are more likely to act and benefit, whether that's our neighbor, whether that's societally, local communities, worldwide, but it's through compassion that I really think that we, and the research shows, that we strive to also support others, like on a kind of larger level.
And you may think like you have a certain amount of compassion and that's all you've got, but it's not true. You can learn to be more compassionate, and that's part of what's in our book, or some of the practices that can kind of, I would say, put you in touch really with your compassionate instinct, that your ability to be compassionate and to care for others and to do things. So we talked, you asked earlier about like the empathy. I mean, sometimes there's a confusion between empathy and compassion and kindness, even, or altruism. And I would kind of see them as connected, but also independent. And we talk about that in the book to some extent. I mean, we have empathy, which is the ability to kind of understand and feel what another person is going through. So you're feeling for that person, and you're also imagining what they're going through. And that alerts you allows you, in a way, to see when somebody is suffering. And your compassionate instinct might, emerge from that. So, and then what does it do, as Shuka was saying, right? It basically drives you to action because you want to relieve that suffering. So that's where kindness and altruism come in. We can do it. And I should say, though, one thing, we have a whole chapter on kindness, and kindness does not require compassion necessarily. I mean, you could be kind to somebody that you don't know at all. You can, you might not see their suffering up close. They might not be suffering at all. They might just be a person you walk by on the street, and you're just want to say hello. That's being kind. And that also is a key to happiness, but compassion is sort of special because it's, it's how we create a world that we want to live in, basically. So.
I want to ask about a variation on compassion, which is self-compassion. So Kira, take us a step further in our exploration of compassion and describe how self-compassion is expressed. That is a separate key to happiness. They're not in the same chapter. It's separate. It's its own topic. So how do we know if we're lacking in self-compassion, and what can we do to develop that skill?
So I think, very simply, self-compassion is compassion that we turn inward. But I think many of us will find that that's hard, or maybe harder. I was going to say earlier about compassion, one of the challenges is who we give our compassion to. And we may find ourselves giving compassion to people who are more similar to us, or people who are more near to us. So there's some work of overcoming those barriers and developing a wider circle of compassion. And maybe part of that is, how do we develop more self-compassion? A lot of the research on self-compassion in the West is from Kristen Neff, and she sort of defines it as being mindful of our own suffering, seeing it as very human, so something that all humans go through, and then extending care and kindness toward ourselves. How do we know if we're self-compassionate? I mean, I think a lot of us probably are aware if we have a tough internal critic. If not, think of a time when you failed at something, or you made a mistake, or you were feeling upset, and what was your internal dialogue at that moment? So was it similar or different from, say, like what you would say to a friend who was in that situation, or to your kid? Or maybe it's possible that you don't even notice those moments when you're struggling, and that probably says something in and of itself. So in order to practice more self-compassion, I mean, first we need to have that awareness to know that, okay, this is a moment when I might need some compassion. Then normalizing, what you're going through, so you're not uniquely flawed more than everyone else. You're not uniquely sort of messed up and doomed in this world. And then doing something kind. So it could be offering some kind words to yourself to counteract the inner critic. But often I think it's easier to sort of physically do something. So I think one of the researchers said, ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? Do you need to take a walk? Do you need to, have a cozy cup of tea? Do you need to maybe call a friend? So whatever would soothe you, and you give that to yourself. And then hopefully, eventually that becomes as instinctive as it is for you to give compassion to other people.
Isn't it really hard to stop wallowing, though? Like, to get to the point of recognizing, or maybe wallowing is not the right word, but like you're just there and you just want to keep beating yourself up, being that self-critic. You can spend a lot of time in that place. So at what point do you recognize, like, it is time to stop?
I mean, we all kind of know we shouldn't be doing that, right? And there's not like this one golden moment where we're going to stop. But, going back to the science, like this whole concept of micro practices, right? It doesn't have to be your forever thing. Spend even 30 seconds a day to start just doing something a little kind for yourself. And those little moments can add up, right? It doesn't have to be a whole self-compassion meditation or writing a self-compassionate letter, though you can in our workbook, right? That is in there. But it's not like, how do you stop? You're not going to stop. We're not going to stop feeling this way, but we can feel it less frequently. And we can kind of bring those pockets of self-compassion, if you may. I've been talking about pockets of joy. Just bring in pockets of that positive thing. And those little things really do add up, like both experientially and scientifically.
Great to hear. Kira, this next question is for you. I want to talk about a topic that comes up a lot among parents and educators when we talk about kids. But we all know adults have a lot of work to do in this area, which is emotion regulation. Can we start by talking about emotions? What is a healthy way to think about emotions versus an unhealthy way to think about emotions? And how is the ability to regulate emotions connected to happiness?
Right. Yeah, big topic. I think a really important one. I think where we get into trouble is absorbing the messages that we get from society that there's good and bad emotions, and the goal should just be to avoid all the bad ones. And that's part of how we talk about happiness. It's not about avoiding all the bad ones. And part of the reason for that is that, we evolved to have these feelings for a reason, because they teach us something about our environment. So if you're, lonely, like Vivek Murthy was, maybe it's an indicator that there's something missing in your relationships or something you need there. If you're overwhelmed, maybe it's an indication that you've taken on too much, and that's a signal that you need to change something in your life. And plenty of research has found that trying to avoid and suppress really backfires and makes us feel worse. I don't know about you all, plenty of my personal experience has come to the same conclusion. But, it's hard because, I don't want to say that it's easy to just accept and allow all the feelings. It's not easy. It can be scary. It can be painful. It can be uncomfortable. So we need, strategies and tools for those moments. And there are lots of them. From the emotion regulation field and research. Simple strategy would be finding Mark Brackett calls your emotional ally, that person that you can call when you're really having a moment and you need some support from someone else. Maybe it is a calming practice, like some sort of breathing, just to get you down from that moment of being really, really activated. Maybe once you've calmed down, it's something a little more cognitive, like trying to think about your situation in a different way. Like maybe you're just going straight to worst case scenarios and you can question that a little bit. Maybe you're being, extra hard on yourself and you can give yourself a little bit of grace, talking about self-compassion. And then, very importantly, there's a piece of using the information from the emotion and doing something, actually changing something, taking an action in your life. So maybe what it's telling you is that you need to leave a job or get yourself out of a certain situation that's not working for you. Maybe you need to have that uncomfortable conversation with a loved one. Maybe you need to go out into the world and stand up for the things you believe in to make things better, but also to feel better. So there's a lot of creativity in how you respond to emotions, I think.
Okay, so last question before we get to audience questions. I really appreciate everybody who filled this out. If you have more, please keep them coming. We're going to get to them after this. So, Shuka, what I appreciate about the perspectives Greater Good brings to audiences is that you rely on science, hence the name Greater Good Science Center. There's a strong connection to science, so do not forget that. Now, the last 5+ years, right, since 2020, have been really tough for a lot of people. How do you apply these practices when you're surrounded by problems that just seem too big?
That's something that I think the three of us grappled with coming into this. How do you put out a workbook on happiness when there's so much unhappiness from a local to a national to deeply international level? And I think the answer a answer to that. We can talk about this for hours, right? But like one of my answers to that is that so many of these practices are about moving outwards. It's about pro-social movement. It's about supporting others. It's about connecting with others. And those are the things that will make us support in some way or another. Not support, I guess. Like, it's one thing that would make us, in some way, support more positivity in this like super increasingly anxiety-filled world, nation especially. There's also a lot of practices that are inward, right? And a lot of people say, you know, if you want to help others, you have to help yourself first. I don't believe that at all. I think that's way too individualistic. But I do think it's a symbiotic relationship. I think the more we are aware of ourselves, the more that we do all this internal work, the more capacity we have to help others. We have a practice on random act of kindness, social connection. There's so much research about volunteering, like what that can do. And again, it's a symbiotic relationship. We give and we also fulfill. But one of the biggest ways to fulfill oneself is the act of giving and connecting. And so how do we think about happiness in that way? Is to not just think of it about the self. Happiness is community. Happiness is collective, you know?
I think one of the things if you do read the book, which I hope you will, and you hear some of the stories that are featured on the Science of Happiness podcast that Shuka produces, you'll hear some pretty tough stories. I mean, of people who've been through some really hard things, maybe things that none of us has ever had to face ourselves. And they're trying the happiness practice and feeling like it's helpful. And I think a lot of the reason why, I mean, a lot of it is what Shuka just said is, of course, we want to, you know, expand the greater good, make our community more supportive. And it's also for our personal resilience, I feel. Like, there's some really interesting research about, like, just practicing random acts of kindness with strangers, like nobody you know even. It has these real effects on your ability to be healthier, to be not just psychologically, although that's very important, but also physically healthier. It's amazing. Taking the focus outward is often a big key to happiness. Because if you're really down and depressed, you tend to ruminate a lot in your own head and you're like really self-focused. That is not a great way to deal with what we're facing right now in the world. I mean, you're bound to feel a lot better if you engage in some way. Whether it's very small, it's just the people around you, or it's like in your community, or you end up joining a collective of people who are trying to make a difference. Those are the kinds of things that are really important in our field at Greater Good.
Maybe the word happiness is partly what trips us up here. Like, I think if we were to say, should we be taking care of our well-being and our mental health while we work to build a better world? Well, yeah, of course, you know.
It didn't fit in the title.
It's not as catchy, for sure.
It's kind of a bait and switch, actually. But no, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm going to read some audience questions. This is about technology. How has tech, especially portable mobile tech, reduced the time we might have had to connect with others? Or has it increased connection? What is parasocial connection, and is that bad? Or are our brains exhausted?
All of those. No. Yeah. I don't know, do you want anybody?
I can speak to the first half.
Okay.
Just from some numbers. Like, yeah, social media helps us connect in some ways. I think I've kind of mostly stopped, but I hear it does, and I know it does, and mostly media helps us connect. I mean, especially if we have loved ones, internationally, I remember being a kid and being like, what if I could talk to my family in Iran on video, like in the movies? And stuff like that is more available. But also, if you look at the data of like when our depression levels started, it's not a good radio sound, plummeting, 2012. And you know what happened in 2012? Smartphones started booming. So technology, just based on the literature, while it really helps us connect, ultimately is not replacing that activity that we did at the start of the show of looking at each other and smiling and nodding and interacting. So I would say, based on the research that I have read and based on my 11-year-old, no. And then there was a second part to that question.
Parasocial relationships. I mean, our brains are exhausted. Okay, so what is a parasocial connection, and is that bad?
Well, I don't know I'm actually not sure what that means. Does somebody else know what that means, parasocial?
It's like you think you have a relationship because you see someone on a phone all the time, and you feel connected to them because they're there. It's not really like an interaction, but it's like what I think a lot of fans have out in the world for celebs and others. It could also be like among influencers and others you see online.
It shows how out of it I am. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Shukar made the point, like, it doesn't replace in-person interactions, which, basically we're biologically designed for. I mean, unfortunately, we've had this long evolution to learn how to, read body language and understand other people's emotions and, the importance of touch for calming and all that stuff. If you're online, you're not getting that, and you're not using your brain in the best way. And I mean, in terms of the exhaustion, there's definitely research about that. I mean, your phones are constantly trying to get your attention. That's what all the social media and your cell phone, the people are making the money off of it. They want your attention, and they're fighting for it, and they're using all the tricks in the book, and they're actually really trying to take advantage of our human nature to need to know, because that is also a real biological drive to know, to be aware of what's happening so that you can scan and make sure you're safe. And we just have a real instinct to want to know what's going on. And if your phone is like here and you hear it and it goes off, I mean, it's very hard to not look, right? You want to know something new's coming in and I'm interested. And the same is true around the way that it, I mean, in terms of like interacting with somebody far away, yeah, I mean, that's an incredible way to have these connections with people who are far away. There's certainly instances in which having a social connection through technology is better than nothing, because you might not be able to reach somebody otherwise, or maybe you live in a community where you feel really isolated and nobody understands who you are. You might want to join, a group online that can kind of offer some support. I mean, that's fair, but I think in the big picture, we're losing something really valuable. And kids who've only grown up in this environment that's, I think, why we're seeing the huge drop in happiness in young people, is they don't have those skills and they're not getting their social needs met. By staying online all the time.
There is interesting reporting coming out. I think this is the year schools have just banned phones in the classroom, and I'm hearing about students feeling a lot less anxiety speaking up in class, taking chances in class, because they don't feel like a student is going to record them and like capture their most embarrassing moment and post it online. So there seems to be a lot of upsides to not being online. So here's another question related to the youth. What advice do you have for youth to be more happy?
You're looking at the one without kids?
Goes back to the control. I mean, not for us to be happy. Okay, the youth. I was like, you're not in control. Oof.
Well, there's a lot of There's a lot of possibilities.
I mean,
certainly.
there's no one silver bullet for youth to be happy except presence and compassion. And I think the presence is important. I told my friend, my kid is listening to his music on his headphones all day, but I like to be there in the afternoon just so he knows I'm there. And I think that supports them. I think, depending on the child's age, being somewhat sharing what's going on in the world in a way that is age appropriate and in a way that's also constructive towards growth, because kids are going to hear everything anyway.
Yeah.
And then also letting them know that you don't have it figured out either. Sorry, there's no really one answer for that one. I'm just the one with the young children, but it's an ongoing thing. How do you make kids more happy? By just being there for them and letting them know that happiness, as Kira said, is a spectrum of emotions. Going back to my kid, sorry, he was like, why am I feeling this way? Pre-adolescence, like one day I feel this way and one day I feel this way. When I see you, I'm mad. When I see dad, I'm like, and I was just like, welcome to the rest of your life. Welcome to being a grown-up. This is a part of adulthood. And so when you talk about happiness, it's just welcome to accepting the spectrum of emotions. And the more acceptance that we can have, I think maybe.
I mean, our book is pretty much, it's focused on adults. But if you go to the Greater Good website, and we have a website called GGIA, Greater Good in Action, and there's lots of practices there. I mean, we have how many in our book? I don't know, 20 some, but there's a lot more than that there. And some of them are specific for kids. So some of the same things that we recommend, like, for example, gratitude. Gratitude, we're not planning to talk about that much today, but that there's a lot of research showing that, helping children recognize when something good has happened to them that maybe they didn't have, they didn't create themselves, it just kind of came to them. Just kind of noticing what we have, the gifts we have in our lives, and or thanking somebody, but heartfelt, not like, oh, go say thank you to your grandma who gave you that gift that you don't even like. It's more like really feeling like, oh wow, this is kind of amazing that we have this food and where it came from and all that stuff, or whatever. We have practices that are really designed for kids, and they're similar in some ways to some of the things we would tell adults to do. Look for the good, be grateful, and enhance your social connections. In terms of being a parent, like what Shuka said, offer love. Love is key, compassionate love for your kids, and to let them know always that that's at the center of your relationship.
So my next question from the audience is about perfectionists. Do perfectionists have a difficult time being happy, or are they doomed to be unhappy? Or perhaps by nature, perfectionists have less compassion?
Yeah, okay, you can look at me.
We're all looking at Kira.
If I recall, I believe the research distinguishes healthy and unhealthy are two different types of perfectionism. So there's the kind that kind of is correlated with positive outcomes and sort of striving for ambitious goals and better mental health. And there's the kind that is more unhealthy, and you're never going to be good enough for these standards that you have for yourself. But we believe in a growth mindset at the Greater Good Science Center. So while we might be predisposed to some of these traits, there's always ways to practice different skills and work around that. So no, I don't think, I really hope that perfectionists are not doomed to, what was it? Unhappiness. Yeah. And probably self-compassion is going to be the skill for those sorts of people. to recognize, I mean, it's very cliche and very obvious as well. We're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have flaws. We all love other people who make mistakes as well. So kind of treating ourselves or holding ourselves to the same standards and with the same love that we give other people. For sure, it's not easy, but it can be done, I think.
I wanted to give a shout out to growth mindset. I feel like it was quite a game changer when I learned it, just knowing that you can evolve with the right supports. And maybe that's also ZPD, zone of proximal development. We're getting probably in the weeds here, but just knowing that you can evolve as a human with the experiences, with the guidance, can really be open up a world in a way that you may not have imagined in the past. Okay, this one is about the workplace. How can employers or managers create a happy team or work environment? Any tips that you recommend? So this may be a little meta because you work for greater good. So like, how do you apply your best practices in your workplace? Maybe that's a place to pull from, or I don't know if folks have asked you for advice about how to apply these practices in the workplace.
I think maybe one pitfall is thinking that work is somehow the special environment where like the rules of normal life don't apply. We don't have to be nice to each other. Like, people don't have emotions. You leave your emotions at the door. But obviously people have emotions at work, and we're very much affected by the relationships that we have in our workplace. We bring that home with us. So at least as a starting point, I would say to, treat people as human beings in their full complexity at work. And that means like working on building a more compassionate culture. And I think we've written about that a lot on Greater Good. Giving people space for their authenticity, for making mistakes and not being sort of immediately punished for them. So that would be like a starting point, but you guys should jump in if you have other thoughts.
No, that's great. I mean, I think that's true. And creating, a lot of it can come from the leadership too. And of course, at Greater Good, we have an incredible leader who's, I think, here in the audience somewhere. So, it's having vision also, having the vision that you want to see this good done in the world. I mean, obviously creating opportunities for people to find their work meaningful in a way, no matter what it is, that you're part of something bigger than yourself that you're working toward. I mean, I often say I feel like my work is like building one brick in the cathedral, that we're kind of trying to create more broadly. And if you feel like that at your job, you're going to be, I think, much happier at work. How do you actually make that happen? Well, some of it might be starting it yourself. Some of it might be talking to other people and trying to find a community like at work. If you feel like, your workplace isn't amenable to that for some reason, you might want to find some allies. You can also go to our website and look at the research. There's tons of research on, ways to make a workplace a better place to be for the workers who are there.
This next question, I think, may be coming from a place of compassion. I have a friend who's sad and isolated after a split up, work problems, and menopause. She tends to isolate herself as a result. What would be a good first step for her to be happier?
I mean, all anyone, I think, wants to know is that you're there for them. Seems pretty,
Yeah.
You could, I don't know, first, it's a very specific question. A first step, if someone's upset, you can just be present for them, right? Non-judgment. It goes back to the social connection practice, active listening. There's so much research on just be there, be present, listen, be supportive. Don't try to fix things. you're not there to mend?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. I mean, if the person who wrote the question is really worried, seriously worried about this person, they may want to recommend counseling of some kind, like professional counseling, because that is often for people a safe space where they feel they can be themselves and really dig a little bit more deeply into the roots of their unhappiness. And I wouldn't want to say like, oh, take our happiness book, that's all you need, because there are cases where people are really getting depressed, and they can't get out of it. Maybe they could use somebody professional to talk to about it, and offering it in that space. If I care about you, I'm hearing you, I'm seeing what's going on, I'm concerned. What do you think about trying to find somebody who can help you work through this, and go from there.
I often think about when how we internalize messages we hear from the world or from our friends or from our loved ones, and we internalize those. And those messages of support can also be internalized. And, that may be part of the reaching out to others, just sending positive messages to the people around you so they know that you're there and that you care about them. All right, for Jill, you often write about the role of nature, music, and policy in happiness. What's an underappreciated factor outside of individual habits that really matters for well-being?
Oh, something outside of those? Wow. Well, I don't know. That sounds very almost personal. I write a lot about nature because I hike frequently. I find it very soothing to me to be out in nature, and there's a ton of research on that. So I write about that. And music is very socially bonding and also feels great when you hear music that you love. And policy. I do write a lot about policy, like comparing different countries and their policies, and how, what I said at the beginning, basically, when you live in an environment that is more supportive, maybe through the kinds of policies that are available to citizens. I mean, there's, research showing how much that improves people's well-being in the greater sense. But they're asking for something outside of all those? I wasn't clear on that.
I think what this might mean is like maybe what's something we've not heard of before that may be surprising.
There's a ton of I love surprising research. That's really fun. Like one thing that I've been kind of interested in lately is how much our voices, how important it is to hear each other's voices in communicating and feeling closer to somebody, which I always think is really interesting because so many of us text. I do that. I text really important things sometimes to my friends, and I feel like I'm bonding with them, but it's actually much better to pick up the phone and call. It's just the sound of your voice is so much a part of then kind of, I don't know, I guess you'd say it's not nonverbal per se, but the auditory part of communication is really important for social bonding. And I think that's really interesting. And that also makes, of course, a case for being together in person where you can talk to each other. That's really important. But I don't know, other things, there's so many. We do write about a lot that's not in the book. The book is sort of focused on these particular keys that we've written a lot about, but there's certainly other things that we talk about. Maybe Shuka or Kira want to jump in on that. Anything that comes to mind?
Anything surprising you, anything that surprised you that contributes to development of happiness?
Was that the question? I thought it was is it outside
well-being.
of the individual?
Right. Underappreciated factor outside of individual habits that really matters for well-being.
Oh, I want to say one thing. Sorry. Diversity. Having a diverse social network is really good for happiness. And I mean that in a very broad sense, meaning, belonging to different kinds of groups of people who have aren't the same as you. I think a lot of people were surprised by that when they looked at the national data, how much diversity contributes to happiness. So anyway, sorry, Shuka.
No,
I interrupted you.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, so let me just ask the last question. Research shows that humans quickly adapt to positive changes. How do you keep practices like gratitude or awe from losing their impact over time?
I mean, I think that there's finding a balance of sort of consistency and variety. I think is typically how we would think about it of, you want to sort of keep up with a practice, and often a lot of these practices, the longer you do them, the more it becomes like a muscle that you're training, and it becomes part of who you are and not just something that you're doing. But also, finding new and different ways to do it, or new and different things to be grateful for, different things to find awe for. I think in the book we may talk about like finding awe in your home, like looking at your furniture and being like, where did this come from, and who made this, and why is it such a weird shape? So you can really find awe in anything, in other people, certainly in nature, but I guess going back to like being creative, being playful with how you use the practices, so it's not just like something you're checking off on your to-do list.
Yeah, I mean, we don't feel the same way every day, and we're not going to want to practice gratitude every single day. And there was some studies, and some undergrad students did it, and it's great, and it's true, but it's just ultimately all of these were done in a lab to some degree. All of these are averages, as we said earlier, and so it's not one size fits all. Right? There are a plenitude of gratitude practices we can do, lots of science on a lot of them, and maybe you're going to find like a spicy version of your own that hasn't been studied in a lab, and I still find a lot of value in that also. So the science of happiness is ever growing, ever changing. We're never going to have a perfect formula for it because we're constantly changing, and so you spoke to awe. I think one thing that, and you spoke about, new things, one thing that I find inspiring when I come back to like, okay, well, there's gratitude, there's self-compassion, there's kindness, bringing it back to the beginning, other people, the awe in others, the awe in community, the awe in our public spaces. That's always a grounding force that can bring you back to the other elements of happiness.
It's an incredible world we live in. Our thanks to Shuka Kalantari, Kira Newman, and Jill Suddy from UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. What I do love about this workbook is that you can write down your thoughts and experiences, and one day look back at your responses and say, hey, that was me. I hope you pick up a copy of the Science of Happiness workbook here or at your local bookstore. And for information about Commonwealth Club World Affairs membership and upcoming programs, please visit www.commonwealthclub.org. I'm Ki Sung, Managing Editor of Digital News at KQED and co-host of the Mind Shift podcast. Thank you and take care.